Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Prince. For a second, we're starting Machiavelli's Prince, looking at the Epistle Dedicatory, the letter of introduction. Now, the Prince is a very interesting book in the sense that it's at one level it appears to be a mirror of princes, the mirror of Prince tradition. In fact, I maybe should do a video about the mirror of Prince tradition, and someone should kind of do what the mirror of princes were, and why it is important in that sense, and the way that Machiavelli kind of plays against and has playfulness with it. Um, um, some significant playfulness with that tradition. And here's a dedication. Now, the dedication is a very interesting one. It was originally written to another Medici. Lorenzo himself, the great Lorenzo, is dead. Now, this is a minor Lorenzo. This is not the same Lorenzo. We should have a point about this. I need to go look over here just to look at the next page, right? This Lorenzo is not going to be the big famous Lorenzo. It's going to be a completely different one. The notes of de Alvarez are very extensive, so therefore I may point to them and may not to them, but let's go look into this. Usually it starts out, Niccolo Machiavelli to the magnificent Lorenzo Medici. Now, this is not the great Medici, this is the younger cousin, who's now going to be the leader of the family in that sense. It was going to write it to a different Lorenzo, a different Medici, who's was a duke of a leading duke of area, but he died, and he was, and therefore he got. This is mentioned in the letter to Verrilli that we read in the introduction video. So usually, and in most cases, and solare, right, in most cases, they usually not only begins with they usually, he adds the words the Alvarez says, Machiavelli not only begins with they usually, celero, he redundantly adds el le pute most times, right? Or in most cases, to emphasize that he is not going to do as men similar situations do. It is evidently important to understand what is usually done. In other words, it's important to understand what is usually done, what is done in most cases. Now, I'm not going to. He says, for discussion of the Epistle Dedicatory, see the introduction. Most cases like this. So, usually, in most cases, those who desire to acquire grace before a prince. And okay, now let's notice this. Let's look at Prince. This is to acquire pleasing and attractive aspect in the eyes of the prince, right? Make themselves come up to him, meet him with those things that are among them are held most dear, or that they see delight him the most, whence one sees them many times being presented with horses, arms, gold cloths, precious stones, and similar ornament worthy of their greatness, right? This idea. They're given many things that emphasize their greatness. One should, now, de Alvarez has a very important long note here, and I think it's worthwhile reading. One should note that many approach one prince in first place, first part of the sentence, but in the second part of the sentence, the one prince becomes many princes who delight in the things that our many suitor brings him. And the author becomes a one, unlike the many who usually gives gift. In other words, this is a pun of Italian pun here. Thus, the author becomes like a prince. The prince is the one prince, but then The one with many suitors then becomes many prince with one suitor, him. Right? Or, as it is well known, Machiavelli sometimes changes from the singular to the plural and vice versa, seemingly without concerning himself with correct grammar. I'm very much stunned this is the case. And I think this is a very important note here, that sometimes the playing with the grammar is very important. This is signal something. The change of a tone will signal something in the text. This is why the nuances of the text in the Italian is very interesting. Um, And he goes, I desiring then to offer myself to your magnificence, with some testimony of my fealty, loyalty, to that magnificence. Now, this is the fourth. Della servo mia verso diniquea. Machiavelli wishes to give testimony to his homage and fealty to that is Lorenzo's magnificence, and not to the man himself. In other words, not to the man. My use of the term fealty is, I believe, in keeping with the image of the feudal ceremony invoked in the opening scene, right? The subtle irony of the Epistle Dedicatory cannot be reproduced in translation. This is what I'm saying. I think de Alvarez is absolutely right here. In the Italian, there's almost an irony here. There's a hint of irony here in that sense, in the Italian, in the original Italian, and that this is, thus, it is to the magnificence of your that he sends this little volume, and at the beginning of the second paragraph, it is to that magnificence what he compares his book. In contrast to the beauty of the gifts usually presented, Machiavelli's equipment suppellaniti lily, right, he says here, right? Compared, in other words, he has not his book is little. His equipment is not going to be as beautiful to the gifts usually presented, right? One is reminded of Machiavelli's description of his book as a useful possession, to which he implicitly contrasts the magnificence of the sempiternal moments of Pelican Athens. In other words, Athens' stuff is beautiful. His is not going to be that one. This Lorenzo Magnificence was the son of Pietro de Medici and the nephew of Giovanni, Pope Leo X. In other words, so he's the son of Pietro and the nephew of Giovanni. Pietro and Pope Leo were the sons of the famed Lorenzo the Magnificent. The younger and lesser Lorenzo attained to his state in Florence as a result of the elevation of his uncle Giano to the French ducal title, Nemours. Lorenzo was subsequently named Duke of Urbano by Leo X. In sum, he was the perfect example of that someone who becomes a prince not by virtue but by fortune. That is, Lorenzo was in the situation similar to Cesare Borgia in that weird element. So therefore, this is why this is a very interesting line here of what's playing here, this magnificence. I want to give. I desire to offer you your magnificence, some testimony of inferiority to that magnificent. I have not found among my equipment anything that I hold more dear or so esteem as the knowledge of the actions of great men, learned by me through long experience of modern things and the continuous readings of ancient things. Okay. Now, I want to go 5 and 6 here because I think it's important. Now, equipment, in other words, the equipment of furniture, military stuff. But 6, Machiavelli's most precious possession is his knowledge of human things. He says nothing concerning his knowledge of unchanging things. So it's human things, not unchanging. That's very important. The Greeks, Aristotle and the Greeks, the internal things, the things that always are, the contemplative things, and then he only speaks of the human things. His knowledge of the fundamentally human things. And this is interesting here. So, in other words, So he's offering his knowledge of two things: his knowledge learned by me through long experience of modern things, his experience, plus all his knowledge from the continual reading of the ancient things, which I have with great diligence long reflected on and examined, and now reduced into a little volume for your magnificence. So the very touching heart of the thing is everything he's known, everything he's known, both from his experience and this and his. The prince contains not just the kind of little bits and this and that, but it is everything he is known through his personal experience of modern things and his knowledge of ancient things through long and continuous reading. So the prince, he says here in the prince, we're given everything what Machiavelli knows, not just a bit, but everything. And this is why people say, oh, we should read the discourses because discourses and prints are complete. No, the discourses and the prints are both different. In other words, they contain all of Machiavelli's knowledge, both of these books. But the difference is one is written to a princes who have, or people who are busy, or princes who have not much time. They don't people who are busy people, and the discourses which are dedicated to young men, young ambitious men who aren't necessarily leaders yet, or maybe young men who are young, not necessarily ambitious. They were literary types, or people, young men, uh, 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 young people of the things, and therefore they have more time. That they have leisure. They have Greek word skule, leisure in that sense. And their leisure allows him to go elaborate and explain more than he can to someone without time. So the prince and the discourses are not really opposing works in terms of one is about princes and one about republics, but rather they are very identical works that ultimately just differ who their audience is. Not one to republicans and princes, but one to the young, the discourses to the young and people with lots of time on their hands, and the disprints that, and both contain all his knowledge on all things regarding things modern that he experienced, all his knowledge of his experience and his learning. So this is why this is the prince's thus is a very important entity, and this is why studying it carefully offers us a, a, a venue into confronting the whole mind of Machiavelli. And through and although let's continue second paragraph. So that's the first paragraph. Second paragraph. And although I judge this work unworthy of the presence of your magnificence, yet I am and I very much trust that it should be accepted through his humanity, concerning how there cannot be had a greater gift from me than to give to one the faculty of being able in a very short time to understand all that I, in so many years, and in so many of my hardships and dangers, have come to know and to understand. Now, this is very important. This emphasizes that what's so great, that what the purpose of this book is. The book, it allows one with to easily, whether it's this is a someone who is a prince or a top person, like I said before, this is you should take it with humility. Know that this is a great gift. That the great what is why it's a great gift. It's not as beautiful. It's not great. It's everything I know, and it's presented in a way that will be able to know everything I know. In other words, in a very short time, to understand all that I in so much time. In other words, you through interaction with this book, you can know everything that through his life that he to this point that Machiavelli had to learn. Okay, so this idea that this is the value of it, the whole life in that sense, um, and through hardships and dangers. Right, this work I have not ornamented either with the fullness of extended clauses or with pompous or magnificent words, or with whatever artifices and extrinsic ordinance which okay, this they here is the they here that is the many who approach princes, right? But Machiavelli is also referring to those who write on princes, right? And he makes it clear in the next sentence when he speaks of those who discuss and regulate the government of princes. This long tradition existed, writing mirrors of princes extended back to Xenophon Sarapatea, outlining the education of prince. And it is in this tradition that Machiavelli alludes, in the sense he alludes to the great tradition of this going to princes, and which they most usually describe and ornament their things. Because I have wished that it not be honored for any of these things, but that only for the variety of the matter and the weight of the theme give grace. So he doesn't want it to ornamentation, style, grandeur, and that things, but rather the variety of the subject matter, the subject matter, and what is being talked about, and what the what is it? The line, the weight of the theme. In other words, the weight of the theme, the subject, and the range of knowledge that he's given. Right, that gives it grace. Nor do I wish it to be thought presumptuous that if a man of low and mean state dares to discuss and regulate the government of princes, semicolon. In other words, he doesn't. In other words, he's admitting that he's not. It's why should a low. He doesn't think it's presumptuous that a man of low estates come to a prince to talk about the government of princes, right? For just as those who, now he uses the metaphor. Now, this is an argument of analogy. He's going to say for just as those who sketch the countryside place themselves below in the plain to consider the natures of the mountains and the high places, and in order to consider the low places, they put themselves high on the mountains. Similarly, to come to know well the nature of the people, one needs to be a prince, and to know well that of princes, one needs to be the people. That's a very interesting metaphor. The metaphor he uses the high and the low. He uses the metaphor of the artist, like the artist who's going to watch it. Well, you're going to study the mountains, you want to be up here in the valley to see the contrast, right? This idea of the contrast. And if to see the valleys, you come from the high peak to see the valleys and the land. Okay, the contrast, right? Machiavelli gives the metaphor, the idea of the painter or the people who draws, right? To know the nature of these things. He now then suggests that maybe that a prince, from the prince, one knows the people, but to know the prince, one must be of the many people. Okay, that is kind of the argument, the metaphor. He uses the metaphor of the high and the low. I'm not going to mention Strauss's famous use of high and low in his famous about how the high and the low in Strauss is it's a. Hold on, let me just do that. I want to talk about that for a second. It's a great line. Yeah, the great quote is from his introduction to his autobiographical introduction, if I remember correctly in that sense. Great quote. It is safer to understand the low in light of the high than the high in light of the low. In doing the latter, one necessarily distorts the high, whereas in doing the former, one does not deprive the low of the freedom to reveal itself as fully what it is. In other words, it's safer to understand the low instead of the high. In other words, than the high instead of the low. Now, why does he do this? This is a critique of Machiavelli in a sense, right? This is Strauss's at one level in his autobiographical reflections that he published as the introduction to his English translation of his 1930 book, the book on Spinoza's religion, on the theological political treatise. Spinoza on his theological political tradition. Strauss purposefully kind of reflects on historically on Germany, right, his time as a young man. And in light of that, this is where that quote comes from, about the Nazis and German history. Like, why did Nazism emerge and that thing? Why this is interesting in this sense is that I mentioned this here for our purposes, because this is basically Strauss would slap Machiavelli for this argument because it's not safe. But this is how Machiavelli does it. Machiavelli makes this argument this way. He makes his argument with the use of the argument of the metaphor of the mountains and the valleys, right? And the contrast, the ability of contrast, to know that it is, in other words, to understand the nature of things, we must understand the contrast from a contrast. Okay, this is an interesting point, that the contrast shows us something. And the last but not least is the final paragraph, right? The final paragraph, the 3 paragraphs of the thing. Take then your magnificence, this little gift, with the spirit with which I send it. Yes, semicolon. I want to talk about those 2 notes. Spirit and a little gift, right? Take this little gift. Animo. Animo is often chiefly as mind, but here it's translated in chapter. It is translated as by me as mostly mind, right? In that sense, and it is translated here in chapter 9, paragraph 4, in chapter this, as a spirit and as heart, and in chapter. In other words, he's pointing out the way he differs the translation of this. Animo is mind, but sometimes he translates it as heart and spirit, right? And he gives the example of those cases. Now, why is that important? Because this is the point: the spirit, animo, the animation, the mind as well, both for this, the animating thing. With the spirit, with which I send it, the mind which I sent it, reason, right? Which, if it is by his magnificence and all this, with care diligently considered and read, he ought to come to know in what extreme desire that he. Now this is that next line. He. Notices that 9 is a very important leve. The third person pronoun is used in formal. This is the third person pronoun is used in formal address, and I have chosen to emphasize the formal Machiavelli's address to the Duke. In other words, he uses lei in here. He wants to say the third person formal, and that he comes to know the greatness for which fortune and his other qualities promise. So, in other words, he will come to know. In other words, that once he reads the book, that he will come to know that my extreme. He come to know my desire that help him to work with him, and that he comes to know that greatness, which fortune and other qualities promise the prince, his prince, him. He is a new prince. His argument, the idea is he's a new prince. And if your magnificence, from the peak of his height, in other words, the magnificent peak of his heights, will turn his eye at some time to these low places, he will know how undeservedly I bear a great and continually malignity of fortune. Now, remember, he talked about Machiavelli himself talks about malignity of fortune in his letter to Raleigh. Here it continues the same message. His idea that he has bear a great and continuous malignancy of fortune. The fortune hate does not reward him, does not seem to favor him. Now, Machiavelli has to bear a great and continuing malignity of fortune. Thus, Cesare Borgia is deprived of success by the extraordinary and extreme malignity of fortune, chapter 7, below. A natural prince, on the other hand, can be deprived of his state only by an extraordinary and excessive force, in a sense. And this leads us to that weird ending here, right? And this is why we're going to stop at this thing. We end the Epistle Dedicatory at this weird element of a discussion of fortune, and that maybe I'm going to give you this big, great gift, but I'm going to give you this great gift, but maybe if you were caring about me a little more, I would not be in this in other words, you can see and pay attention to, see that I'm unjustly warranted this this great and continuous malignity and fortune. So your great peak of your height and your fortune will look at turn his eyes at some time to these low places and see me in my misfortune, and maybe help me because I can help you. Okay. Now the story of what happens with the prince when he gives it. All of a sudden, someone gives him the story of what actually happens when Machiavelli the prince is given to Lorenzo. Well, instead, what happens is just immediately after that, someone brings these hunting dogs, these beautiful hunting dogs to Lorenzo, and Lorenzo basically tosses the book aside and pays attention to the dog, and thus tells us more about Lorenzo than one maybe should know. Well, but that says a lot. Actually, I'll get something crazy here. I'm going to. So, I apologize for a second. I had to not kill something, but take a piece of paper that was driving me crazy. What's there? We finish this up. Please like it. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. That's it. We're going to go next time. We're going to see each other. We're going to be looking at the first chapter of The Prince. Hit the like button. Share it far and wide. Share it. Tell everyone to come check us out. Well, that's it. In other words, if you didn't like it, you can say, I don't like it, but say why in the comments. Another thing you can do is, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It helps the channel. We're near the magic number. And or maybe we have to sometimes see this. Oh, we're at that magic number. The magic number. No. So come do it. That's why sharing it and liking it helps the algorithm get more attention. People may come check us out. Forward it to mention it to your friends and other people to come check the channel out, and maybe some join it also and come check out the channel. You can see the old version of The Prince that we did before. Maybe compare the two in that sense, okay? Or you can watch any other my other video things and playlists on various texts. You can check me out on social media, links below. If you want to know more about me as my research as a scholar, as an academic, and my research and things like that, you can check my academic social media below that. And if you want to help me financially in the sense, or be a contributor to do what I do, help be a sponsor or a patron to help me do, fund a little bit what I do here. You can do so through the subscribe to our Patreon links below, or you can just simply buy one of my books listed below. You can buy it either at your local bookstore or through an online seller like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Libris, whatever. Or you can just go directly to the publisher. Well, that's it. Take care. We'll see you next time, and we'll look at chapter 1. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Have a good one.